Hello, this is Gretchen Baskerville, and this is part 2 of my audio interview with David, a man I first interviewed in 2019 while I was writing the book, The Life-Saving Divorce. Although many marital abuse victims are women, we know that some are men. The majority of interviews I do are with women, but I want to make sure that the men get a voice. And David's story is just one of several interviews I've done with male survivors of abuse and betrayal. While most victims of abuse are indeed women, we need to listen to men's stories too. When I interviewed David the first time, I didn't know his whole story, and when we finished his horrifying tale, I was shocked. I lost several nights of sleep. I asked for evidence that his story was true, and he supplied it. I mean, this is a very good man, an intelligent man, a devout Christian man from a good Christian family whose parents set a great example of marriage. Now, I know there are some people who just don't believe it when a man claims to have been abused by a deceptive, manipulative, or malicious wife. But such wives exist. Plenty of books have been written by children of narcissistic mothers, for example. Many of you have wondered what happened to David after his divorce that I detailed in Chapter 9. Did everything go well once the divorce was finalized? Well, it's been rocky, but it's had a positive ending. As you heard in Part 1, David's life after divorce was complicated by having a bold, lying ex-wife. In Part 1, he talks about the year-long, very expensive custody battle, and then he ends Part 1 with the shocking revelation that he has agreed to share custody with his ex-wife as long as she follows the court's guidelines. So in Part 2, we're going to start with that. And by the way, David does not recommend you do what he did if your children's safety is at risk. We talk about dating, remarriage, how to support the kids, and how to co-parent with a narcissist. So let's jump in. At the end of Part 1, you said something, David, that really, I'm sure, blew everyone away because it shows that you took the high road and it shows that you really cared about the best interests of your children because you knew that your children actually really loved your ex-wife. You know, she was a good mother to young children. I'm sure that shocked everyone that after a year of court battles and tens of thousands of dollars, you would volunteer to share custody again. Talk to us a little bit about that and what has happened in your life since that time.
I want to be clear about yes, my ex-wife was actually a very good mother, and she continues to be a very good mother to young children, and that's sort of in her mind how she can relate to them. I don't recommend what I did at all. If there's any evidence of abuse or like behavior that someone's ex-spouse is doing that puts the children's safety in concern. And it sort of was derived from when they were ordered to come back from the other state, and things started falling apart. The judge in the case said, "Look, what I want the best is children need both their parents in their life. I would like this to be 50-50. However, my ex-wife's behavior made that impossible in that moment." And he's like, "We will reevaluate as we grow and create peace for the children." And I really appreciated the judge saying that. I think with all the things that were going on in my life and all the therapy that I had gone through, I had become very confident in being independent from her. And so I could look objectively. I wasn't under her spell anymore. I wasn't under her control or any of those things. And I could really objectively look, okay, we have a very stringent criteria for how we would move in that direction. And I remember telling her in court, it was a strange moment where the judge actually cleared the courtroom to have us have a conversation to try to resolve the issues. And again, it's like one of those things that I really appreciate this judge taking the time to try to bring peace to the situation. And what I said to her is like, in 9 months, let's follow the rules, because it was very difficult for my ex-wife to follow rules. That was like one of the red flags. And it was like, let's follow the judge's rules for 9 months. Let's see where we are. If we are making peace, then we'll move towards this, because both you and I want the same thing, which is having the kids 50-50 and encouraging each other's relationship. I was like, if you show me that, then we can move in this direction. I have never worried about your ability to take care of the kids, but right now they need the most stable house, and I provide that. That's what the judges said, and that's why your behavior, you need to show us good behavior. We also got a really good high conflict parenting coordinator, that, you know, so it wasn't just me saying these words, because it becomes very difficult in our interaction and the way that we talked. I needed a third person there that was objective, appointed by the court, to help us go through this process.
I want to interrupt here for just a moment because I had microphone problems, so I'm going to re-record my side of the conversation. You know, David, you have gotten great therapy, and you were much stronger than you were 2 years before. You had a great judge and a great parenting coordinator selected by the court to act as a referee between you and your ex-wife. If you didn't have that, I kind of doubt it would be safe to share custody with an abuser. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's a team effort. And I think one of the things that I know from my past and behavior of abusers or people that have trauma bonded is isolation. And in this next stage of life, and making decisions like this, I think it was very good that we had a team to provide the boundaries and the interactions and the goals to hit, because everybody sort of needs goals and structures. One, it gives you hope, so it's not just some nebulous thing. And two is it's achievable, you know, like you can measure against it. And so in this particular case, we could easily set up goals by third parties and have a team together that does this. So, you know, like I said before, it wasn't without its ups and downs. There were some weird things, like she moved into the apartment building just up the street from where I had the kids. And so like they could walk across like one road over to get to her. And so that created challenges. Also during my parenting time, she would show up at the bus stop, you know, uninvited, to send the kids out, which created a weird dynamic. So there was challenges, but we had the weekly meetings, and then a year later, we were able to have conversations, and it looked like, and there was challenge with the kids, because it came to the point where the kids were like, this message was, you are preventing us from seeing mom, you know, because they'd be with me. And then
let me ask you, so they're claiming you're not allowing us to see mom, but during those 9 months of after the conversation where you said, you know, I want to get to this point because I know you want to get to this point, did she behave well during that time?
She did.
Okay.
She did, short of some things. I think it was one of those things that once she ran up against the courts and the court doesn't move, it becomes the easiest thing.
So it becomes very clear to her that you could buffalo, you know, a normal person, but the court's got your number, and the parenting coordinator is used to high conflict parenting situations.
Right.
And they're not going to be snookered by them.
Yes.
So your children, so what you just said were, just to come back to that, your children had just said, you know, Dad, you're keeping us from mom. Do you think they came up with that themselves, or do you think she sort of planted that in their minds?
No, she absolutely planted that in their minds, and she would do it in very subtle ways. That she would be like, oh well, I would like to be able to go to this thing with you, but dad won't let me.
Mm.
There's very undermining behavior, and it was like, so a lot of times we had therapists for each one of the kids and group therapists, and a lot of the conversation was around this team oriented thing. Like, it's not just one of us deciding it. Dad doesn't have that power to prevent you. I have to follow the rules just like everybody else does. I have to follow the judge's rules. I have to follow the therapist recommendations, and both mom and I make the decisions, medical decisions about you and how things are going to go. And so we have to follow like these external sources. And that gave me a lot of protection. I mean, the kids, I don't think really understood that fully. But I wanted to also see good behavior from my ex-wife in the sense of stabilizing behavior. So examples like having a job and keeping it, having a house that she had. And so over that 9 months, she started doing all those things. She started paying bills. There wasn't crazy issues where she wasn't dropping the kids off at scheduled times. So a lot of this was like, we kind of put the lockdown on everything. It's like, you show up for the times that you're supposed to show up. You leave. We communicate in only text form and written form, and you don't try to manipulate the situation. And it's like, those are all trust building things so that we can get to the point of going to what we all feel is the best situation. We
So
also
you actually put some you didn't instantly trust.
Nope.
You made sure all the communication was in some kind of written, verifiable form. You had this third party. You were responsible to cooperating with what they laid down, the line they drew in the sand, and so you both had to toe the line. In other words,
right. And I think that that's actually a really good thing. It's like when you have a broken marriage, and when you have the trust that's broken there, like your intimate partner, it's not just wave a hand and say, oh, well, I'll trust you right now. It's all about building up little things that you can do at a time, so that that you give a little and you see a little, and you build a track record of doing this. And that way you can find a new normal of how to interact with people.
So she paid the bills, she got a job, she paid her mortgage, she showed up on time to transition the kids, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. She communicated with me about decisions that she wanted us to make, so that there was a lot of co-parenting interaction. And all along this time, we also had our parenting coordinator and the therapist for our kids, like saying the same things. So it wasn't just me, saying, oh, you have to follow my rules or the highway. It was like, no, we have to model good behavior for our relationship, and let's understand that this is a high conflict relationship that we have right now, and we would like the future to be a low conflict trust relationship, so that we can communicate back and forth. But you don't just snap your fingers and say, oh, well, here's the rules and we're all going to follow them trustfully.
Yeah. So and the other thing it took out of the room is, I'm the good parent, you're the bad parent. You're the one who screws up. Yeah. This way there's a new parent in the room. Both of you,
right.
You both have to obey the rules. And I do, I appreciated that in my divorce as well. All right.
So I have to follow it myself. It's like, it's not fair if we're just imposing all these things on the other person, no matter how the marriage went or the different mental health behavior. If you cannot follow it yourself, you cannot ask someone else to follow it. I just don't think that is appropriate or has integrity into the relationship. So you have to be good with yourself as well, because your kids are going to be looking at that too. Do the rules switch for you? And because then you're going to reinforce their opinion of you, that like you are the bad parent that you're preventing. So you have to be very circumspect in how you interact.
Now, I know it's really, we're not supposed to let our children know very much about the legal details of a divorce. That's what all the divorce experts say. Did your kids know that you were coming up to this 9-month mark? And did everyone agree that it was time to share custody at the end of that 9 months?
I believe so. At the end of time, because I think all the things she had a good job. We were communicating. She hit all of her times that she was supposed to be, like returning the kids or picking up the kids. The children really loved their mom. I mean, and she is very kind and much more soft and in her communication with them. And they just, wanted. So there was always this cloud. I don't know if they knew specifically that there was this 9-month period. I'm sure that they were probably told that, but we sort of got to the point of, she would bring it up each time in the parenting coordinating meeting. She would be like, well, I think we should go to 50-50 custody now. And the parenting coordinator would be like, well, we all agreed that 9 months is the time that we would have. And then we got to that time, and I would say, I said to the parenting coordinator, do you feel like it's appropriate for us to do this, or should we check in another 3 months or something like that? And she asked some pointed questions of my ex-wife about, like, if we move to that, are you going to support his relationship with the children? Do you feel like you'll be able to work in that new environment? And she said yes to all those things. And then we kind of came up with a trial plan. So it wasn't just a snap our fingers, all of a sudden we went to 50-50. We would extend the time and do more one-on-one times with each one of the individual kids with their mom. And then it moved slowly till we got to, so it basically took about 2 or 3 months to get to full 50-50 custody. So we started it at 9, and then we added more time, like extending it to Wednesday, and the therapist checked off on it. And we checked in with the kids and the kids therapist to make sure that, the wheels weren't coming off or anything like that. So I felt like it was a very positive transition. I felt like it was, it was really good. It came with some other issues, like, my older daughter then decided that, it's tough when your kids get older. I mean, my oldest daughter is turning 18 this year. And so around that time, she was 15, 16, so that they can actually start to have an opinion about where they are. And so there were some challenges with that. And she's like really good, she considers herself best friends with her mom. And so, I didn't like some of the behavior that they interacted together, but we had therapists that you have to really trust. And so finding a good therapist is really, really good. I've had some success with some of the therapists for my kids, and other therapists not so great.
Okay, so now that you brought that topic up, you've got to tell us, what do you look for?
So I look for a therapist. I didn't know this before, and one of the particular therapists, this did not work out well. And you look for therapists that don't make custody recommendations. They make
That
relational.
do not make custody recommended. Okay.
Because that you're basically handing over too much power to them, because they can evaluate and say things, and then you sort of like you're put. It's like one of those things that, don't ask a question if you don't want the answer. If you put a therapist having custody evaluation constructs, then when they make a recommendation and you don't want to do it, you then become the bad guy and you have to justify the reason why you do that. And so the particular therapist that we have is actually, she's very good at, she actually does a lot of child custody evaluations for the court system. That's where she only has a few therapy clients. And the problem is, she's very good with making snap decisions about things. And she's very used to making custody decisions. And so she would do that in the therapy environment, which is extremely not helpful.
Mm.
Because it would be like, oh, well, we need to change the situation to create calmness. And then there was no other follow-up. So it was just going from crisis. You basically learn how to manage crisis to crisis rather than relational issues that come up, and how to be relational. So that is a huge criteria for me and therapists, is that they're non-custody evaluators and more on relationship. So they can say things like, I think you should spend more time with your mom or your dad, doing something good and constructive. I think those are appropriate things, but saying things like, well, we're going to change it so that you stay with your mom or your dad a different amount of time, that's different than the court cases, what the court outlines.
So this is a person who has a hopeful, positive attitude toward the relationship between any given child and either parent.
Right.
And looks for ways to help you get along.
Right.
And if there are some negative patterns, looks for more, you use the word constructive. Give us an example of a more constructive way of using your time with your mom, for example.
Right. So an example is like for one of our daughters. So my oldest daughter ended up going and spending more time with her mom, and my youngest daughter saw that and wanted to copy that. And so she would be like, well, I need to spend more time with mom. And her therapist was kind of like, well, what are we going to do with that time? It's like, is it just to stay there, or is it like, what do you want? And getting them to kind of say it, like verbalize that relationship. And so it was like, oh, well, if we want to have more one-on-one time, let's do this, guys. And she would sit us down in a room, is like, what would be a good way to have more one-on-one time with each of you? Do you know what I mean? So that you could have specialized time. So I would consider that a relationally constructive way of doing it, rather than, yes, we need to give you more time with your mom, let's add an extra 3 days.
Okay, so it's not just time, it's the quality of the time you have. What are you going to be doing together? And it sounds like this therapist is putting a lot of it into the hands of the child. What do you want to do that would be constructive with mom? Or are they both in the room together?
Both of us. So this particular therapist would get my ex-wife and myself in a room and say, these are the things that I'm hearing from your youngest daughter. What do you think about that? And so it was very conversational, and she allowed my ex-wife to say her piece, and then she would allow me to say my piece. And she would say, well, it really sounds like this. She wants to have quality time, or she wants to follow her sister. She would say, I don't make custody evaluations. What I do is like, these are the areas that you can work on. These are the relational issues that we have. So how do we do that? And then it became a constructive conversation between, co-parents, of saying, well, let's have her have quality time with you so that she feels like her older sister isn't having something special that she's missing out on. So how do we do that? And how do we encourage each of our relationships with each other? Well, it's like, all right, let's have movie night, or or we'll take this trip or something like that. So then it became very relational bonding for both households, and the co-parents walked out, and it wasn't a zero-sum game where you're like, well, I'm losing a day to you, and you're gaining, so that there's pitting against each other. It was more like, hey, I can encourage you in your time with your mom, and your mom can now encourage your time with us.
Now, did your ex-wife have any concerns about what you do with any one of your kids? I mean, did she have any criticisms?
No,
Okay.
it's kind of, in the beginning, when, like the crazy amount when I got full custody, there was a lot of, she encouraged the police to call the kids to call the police on me. She encouraged them not to do any of the activities that we had like planned. And there was a general sense with my kids that if we agree to anything dad says, then we are capitulating to mom, and we're being disloyal to mom. So we had to work through a lot of that. The therapist that they originally were challenged my ex-wife on a lot of the communication that she was doing with the kids, and then the kids turned on that therapist, and so we had to actually get new therapists because
Oh,
I don't know if
wow.
you remember from my story that was a very solid tactic. You either agree with me 100% or we're switching therapists. And
All
so
right. I
she,
remember that from your story with her. Right, right.
right, so she was kind of teaching the kids to do the same thing.
Got it.
So that's, that was like part of the challenge. So, but that sort of died down because it doesn't hold any water. It's like,
Mhm.
I have the house where I own the house. She was renting. I have a stable job. She was getting to be having a stable job. Um, like my ex-wife's main complaints to me was that I didn't give the kids enough voice or efficacy in the way that they wanted to be raised. And which means like capitulating to whatever they wanted.
Mm.
And I obviously my house was a little bit more strict and structured, and her house wasn't. It was a little bit more chaotic. Well, actually, a lot more chaotic. And so, you know, those were the things that she challenged me on. But then the therapist would come in and say, yes, you need to have flexibility, which he's providing. Where you have free time, but you also need to have regular meals. The kids not to have unlimited screen time, and like that. When you say you're going to do something, you actually follow through and do it, and that's what he's providing.
Mm-hmm.
So the constant communication with activities and stuff were happening, so I didn't have to be the person saying it all the time, which
Yeah,
is
you,
very.
you didn't have to be the bad guy. You're not the, the person she has to please. She has to please the therapist or the court. And that makes it a lot better. Okay, so I get what you're saying. So you want a therapist who wants the relationships to grow in genuinely healthy ways. It's not just a matter of spending more time with mom. It's what are you going to do together? A project, homework, whatever it
Right,
is that's
right,
positive.
because it ceases to be this thing where there's this sort of adversarial role that you can have with the co-parent, where it's like, I want to make my house better than yours. I'm going to have nicer vacations. I'm going to have bigger TVs. I'm going to do all these competitive things so that you want to be with me more, so that they're not with you.
Mhm.
And then having the relational oriented therapist, it becomes like, hey, look, let's have quality time with your mom. Let's have quality time with your dad. And that means doing things together and not just like things that you fill your life with distractions. It's like, okay, these are good substantive things.
Yeah, that's
And so,
great. And then that's what research shows too, that good parenting has very little to do with, the money you spend on them. It's the time you spend on with them, doing projects in the home, doing projects outside the home, doing leisure activities with them outside the home. I mean, these are, and then having fair and consistent discipline. Those are the things that really matter.
yes,
Okay, now I want to move on because everyone wants to know you got remarried.
I
We
did.
said that in part one, so it's not a surprise to anyone who read, who listened to part one. How did you even have courage to date? And everyone wants to know, how did you know she was safe? I mean, the formulas you were taught by your church was to ignore all red flags if she met a certain litmus test. If a woman, wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, then she was automatically good. So how did you, in your new way of thinking, determine whether or not your wife to be, your second wife, was a safe person?
I think it's a growing process. One is like, again, like I said, I mean, I feel very blessed that I was heavily therapied. Like I went through a lot of stuff where this conversation came up, and it was mainly with secular therapists that, I basically reevaluated everything that I came, that I was taught. And I think that deconstruction was really good. I mean, the end result was I still had I still came through with my faith. I still came through with all my belief in God. But it was more of like a reevaluation. It's like I was looking at the life I wanted through like a completely smudged glass window. And so I misinterpreted what I was seeing on the other side. And I needed structured good therapy to learn how to clean off the window. So it was like reevaluating all the things that come across. And one of the things that I know that I reevaluated is the entire concept of there is the one. Maybe it's like Disney movies, maybe it's in Christianity, or you hear these stories of testimonies of people that are in your church about like, oh, I saw this person across the way and I stopped drinking, and all of a sudden it was a great marriage for 75 years. And it's the stories are there is the one. I don't think that that's biblical. And I had that conversation with my secular therapist, specifically around these are the things that I was taught and what I thought. I don't believe, like, how do you do that? And I spent a lot of time reading, like, what does dating mean? Like, I mean, you got to realize growing up with the kiss dating goodbye and the whole Josh Harris thing, I didn't know what dating was. I mean, like I was complete, I'd never really broken up with anybody. I mean, my ex-wife was like the first person I actually had seriously dated, and I ended up marrying her. So it's like, how do you do dating? And so, I think I approached it also with the mindset of I don't need another person in my life to be complete. If I don't feel complete myself, another person isn't going to complete that. And so I spent a lot of time working on myself. I spent a lot of time being confident in myself, and also understanding that yes, I do want companionship. Companionship and completeness are two completely different things. You're not looking for someone to complete you, because you can never be that for someone else, and you cannot expect them to be that for you. Yeah. And so when I started doing dating, I think I did online dating, and I remember just having the conversation with the people that I was dating. I was like, look, I'm in my 40s now. I don't know how, I don't know how to do this. So like, hey, let's just talk and just communicate back and forth, and just understand how dating works. Here I was in my 40s learning how to date. Like I had no idea how to do this. And the sad story is that it's actually incredibly easy to be a good date if you just don't want to have sex. It's kind of amazing. Like the bar that men set in the dating community is just terrible. And you can seem like the greatest person in the world by just not wanting to have sex. And just,
in other words, getting to know them, enjoying them, joking around, learning about their life, learning about what's contributed to making them who they are,
right,
rather than wanting to jump in the sack right away.
Right. And so for me, it was like a lot of it was just red flag things. Like what motivates you to be the person that you are? And people feel pretty comfortable with me when I talk to them. And so you gotta get to that. And especially if you take the whole sex thing off the table, all of a sudden people just want to talk to you. And it's just kind of incredible. And so like I would say the balance of there are unique people, and there's not one person for you in the world. And number two is searching for red flags in an objective way are actually great ways to approach dating. And just realizing this isn't the only person that you're going to find. There is lots of people out there. And also, guess what? You're going to be okay if you don't find somebody. You need to work on being complete yourself. This is getting married is a super crazy thing. And we all come from a background where we really screwed up the first time or the second time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you got to realize it's like, oh, well, this is not a great thing. My experience with this is actually horrible. And so I would constantly remind myself, it's like, I do not want to do that again. And so I'm never going to be in a situation where I'm saying, I'm just going to go along with this again. It's like, I need to be okay as a person. I need to be complete in myself. and I need to find another person that is complete in themselves, and we can be friends and move along this path. And I don't need this thing, but I want it.
Yeah, you're able to stand on your own 2 feet, and you have self-respect, and you like who you are, even if you're alone. And I think that's a great place to get to. I think another thing that I see a lot in the Facebook private group is that people say, well, okay, marriage, I've got to get away from this horrible person. But then they get the formulas, the same formulas that led to the first problem lead to the second problem. And the formulas, I wrote some down earlier today. The assurance that we get from some of our very well-meaning but wrong church leaders, that all will be well, and we can ignore the red flags because the love of Jesus in our heart will change their life. And when you think about it, that doesn't make any sense, because Jesus walked on the face of this earth for 3 years, and he didn't change everybody's life. There were plenty of people who he said, go this direction, and they said, no thanks, I think I'm going to go my own way. Another assurance we get from just either spoken or non-spoken, either from Christian books or from youth leaders or whatever, is that our good example will inspire holiness in them. And of course, with two mature people who are reliable and responsible and stand on their own 2 feet, there's nothing better than to have someone who is mature and who sets a good example. It just makes life so much easier. But when we get this promise that that's going to work and it will overcome any red flag, that's a real problem. Another well-meaning but incorrect message we get from our churches and from our Christian books is that person's childhood injuries or their losses will be healed by having a relationship with us, because we came from such a loving, caring Christian home.
Right.
And that, you came from a good, loving, caring, genuine Christian home. So did I. And these were kind of the messages that we got that set us up for, kind of, not using the best wisdom and best judgment God gave us. So give us an idea, were there messages that still made you want to just go along with what, someone said? I mean, did you have to struggle to fight off the old mindset?
Well, yes, and I constantly still have to do it. I mean, and the one thing I think this probably is a good place to kind of talk about, like when I was diagnosed with sex addiction, and it didn't turn out to be that, and it was more love addiction. It is a real addiction, meaning I have the temptation in my life at any point to put myself down and elevate the person that I love above those things. It's not going away. It still is in my marriage. And knowing that I have that, you also need to pick a significant other that doesn't take advantage of that or make that difficult for you. So you actually start to do some sorting criteria. And the example of how that works in my life, it's like if you were an alcoholic, you don't marry somebody that owns a bar. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So all bartenders and bar owners are off the table, no matter what wonderful person that they are. You just don't do those sort of things. And so those are criteria. You got to realize that where your weaknesses are and where they are. And so, in evaluating with me with love addiction and stuff like that, I had to find someone that was kind and had lots of relationships that I could evaluate how she relates to other people. And that when there's conflict, how does she resolve conflict? Because for me, that was where my love addiction is the weakest, is in conflict, because then I feel like I capitulate because I'm not being a good husband or boyfriend or something like that, and then I suppress what I feel or my opinion about the things and then just go along with what's happening. So
Mm.
I set up some criteria that I had in evaluating people, like that they had constant relationship and were heavily active with other people, which is funny because I'm an introvert. I'm a pretty serious introvert. And so it's sort of like the people I'm with, I think had to be an extrovert because I needed lots of relationships to evaluate them on. And how how do they interact with difficult people? Like it's funny. It's like these are like battle worn tests that I had to come up with that it's kind of hard to explain. It's like, how do you figure out dating? Like, what is your type? But it's like, I don't really care about type. I don't really care about the normal things that people think about in dating. I'm like, who is your circle of friends? Which one is the most difficult? And how do you interact with them when they're rude to you?
Mm. Excellent. Yes. And I love how you said, if you're a love addict, so you're a natural people pleaser, you want to get along with everyone, you're naturally agreeable, you're likely to be the one who apologizes first and apologize automatically. You want to be with someone who doesn't take advantage of that. Someone who even says, you're debasing yourself too much.
Right.
If I accept your offer, I'm being unfair to you. So you need someone with really good boundaries,
Yep.
who will always fight fair, who always wants fair relationships, and will not take advantage of you. I think you and I are kind of similar that way. Just, wanting to naturally be people pleasers. And we have to be with someone who doesn't ever take advantage of that, and who will actually say, no, you're giving in too much. That you're giving too much. Don't give that much. It needs to be
Yes.
fair between the two of us.
Yes, and as a part of my therapy and stuff like that, I went through a lot of 12-step programs for the love addiction, and one of the steps is making a fearless moral inventory, and that's one of the things that I constantly encourage people on is like you have to make a fearless moral inventory of where you are weak, and realize that you are going to constantly come up against that weakness. We are humans. We have our problems. We have our traumas. We have all these things. Okay, so so learn really well how to identify that weakness and when it happens, because it's going to happen, and then evaluate how people relate to that weakness. Like in the weakness, do they like help build you up? Do they respond to the weakness by providing protection, or room or something like that? Do they understand that that is a weakness for you, and can they say things like, hey, are you doing that? Are you doing that thing that you've told me about? And it's like, and that can only happen with a fearless moral inventory of yourself, because a lot of times I think I, you know, I was wrong, but I also got into my first marriage 100%. And so I'm going to get into my second marriage 100% as well. And so you have to do things differently between the two. And you can't just blame the other, the other significant other for your blindness or your weaknesses that you have had. Yes, they traumatize you. Yes, it's completely inappropriate, all the things that they did. But you need to evaluate yourself and say, okay, well, I'm weak in this area and I need help about identifying. And that's part of becoming that complete person that can actually be a good spouse. And that's a different journey for each person. And you can't just look up and say, oh, well, it's going to be like this, or it's going to be like that. It is a journey. Just like I said, I needed to come to the point of something where I felt comfortable leaving my first marriage being dissolved. And lots of people who've come up, talk to me who are in similar situation and challenges. I was like, you need to pick the one thing that's going to give you the confidence that it's okay. And so that takes a lot of help from other people. Same thing with dating. You got to pick the one thing that you can define your completeness, that you feel okay, so that you're not getting into a relationship to fill a hole. And because you're just going to go back to the same behaviors that you did before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. if we um, think that the way to love is being pacifying the other person, and they
Yep.
let us do that, we're in trouble. I mean, I'd always describe, I remarried 4 years ago, and I described my husband as a grown-up, an ethical, fair-minded grown-up. And that's
Yes.
what makes him so charming and wonderful, because I know that he won't take advantage of me. I know that he won't let me, do kind of the debasing behaviors that sometimes we were taught to do as, by well-meaning youth pastors and things, but we learned to be too agreeable and not say what we needed. And saying what we need was something I had to learn. It sounds like it's something you had to learn.
Yep.
And it's so important. And if we come into a relationship, as we're doing online dating or whatever, and we speak what we want, speak what we need, and that person doesn't have it or doesn't give it, especially things like authenticity and integrity and fair-mindedness and kindness, it gives us a visceral response, and it's time to end it, run, leave, cancel the next date, whatever it is. So how did so you've done some online dating. I know a little bit about your story, because I think you guys met through work. Am
Yes.
I correct there? So now kind of give us the romantic part of the story. Everyone wants to, well, how did you meet?
Right. Right.
And how did you test it? How did you test it? And she must have wanted to test it too, because here she is with dating a man with 3 kids, with a very turbulent ex-wife, and a lot of legal bills, I'm sure, resulting from that. So how
Yep.
did that all play out?
So my wife and I actually met at a startup that we had worked together. Actually, while I was still married at the time. It was a small startup. Her circle of friends and my circle of friends, we had kind of had the same circle of friends, but we had never met each other until we started working together at the startup. I knew who she was, like, by name, but we had never physically met or anything like that until we started working together. And this was sort of my last year of marriage that I was there. And so I don't know if anybody's ever worked in startups, but it's pretty close, and you get to see see each other in conflict and stuff like that, and trying to build something.
Just
like,
to explain to the audience, a startup is starting a brand new business from scratch. So
right.
and so you collect a team of highly talented people together who are willing to do these kinds of risky ventures and start a company from your dining room table.
Yes, and there's certain, I mean, you can almost think about startups being almost like a short-term marriage contract to build something. And so there's high conflicts. You get into arguments and disagreements with people. Do you get tragedies, like if you don't make payroll, and everybody, like in the startups that I usually done, there's like been pay cuts and stuff like that. There's like not missing dates, not missing, missing sales and stuff like that. You get conflict in that organization. So it's actually a great way to see how people relate to conflict. And so my current wife and I's friendship in the business sort of like, was there. And then later on, she told me, I mean, I think marriage is like, incredible and holy, no matter what the state is in. And so I would not badmouth my ex-wife, who was currently my wife during that time. I didn't know that because we had the same circle of friends, there was a lot of people that were communicating with my current wife about challenges that I was going through. And that sort of got her thinking about, me, because I didn't trash her. And so she's a very attractive person. She's old, like she's younger than me, but like was in her late 30s, which I also was like really important to me. I was not one of those guys that was looking for somebody in their 20s. I most certainly wanted someone who was late 30s.
And she
That
had
is,
never married.
she
And
had
she
never
was,
married.
Mhm.
She's the oldest of like 7 kids. And so uh, we just sort of were friends. So when I finally ended up being separated and going through the divorce process, she was my friend, and she it was funny. She would come to work and describe the horrible online dating things that would happen for her, because she thought the only reason why you would do online dating is so you can get good stories out of it. And so I just thought in my mind, hey, here's this strong, independent young lady that's actually kind of not interested in getting married, because she would go on like 2 or 3 dates with people and then not continue to date them anymore. And I was just like, oh, well, she just kind of likes to meet new people. She's very extroverted and stuff like that. Um, and so like later on, when I've gone through some of my, online dating and stuff like that, that I didn't really tell anybody about, because honestly, I was embarrassed. I didn't know
Sure.
how to do dating. And I'm also a pretty private person. Um, that's why I'm talking to you. Um,
And the millions of people on YouTube.
right, right. And so, kind of going through that, she also had a group of friends that were all Christian single ladies that were high career oriented people, which I knew I wanted. And so she was going to be my friend into all the wonderful ladies that were going to be strong, independent, have their own careers, and could be my partner. Because I think people know what type of person that they are, and I knew that I wanted to get married again. Um, and but I was willing to wait as long as it needed. I just really like the institution of marriage. Um, and so we started hanging out. I hung out with her friends and stuff like that, and the people, because I, after having moved, I was living in, like, this is right when we were going through the whole divorce. The kids hadn't moved to the different state. I was living in a friend of mine's basement at the time, and just kind of getting my sea legs of how to be an independent person, in doing this whole thing. And so it ended up being, I thought that she wasn't interested in doing any sort of dating, and she was just going to be an independent person. And then through a series of friendship conversations, she finally was like, you know, we started hanging out together, and she was really concerned that my kids would be worried, would find out that I was hanging out with her, and that they would be confused. And so she, from the very beginning of our friendship and stuff like that, she was always very concerned about my kids and making sure that they were going to be okay, um, and everything. So I just thought that this was going to be a long 2-year process. I basically started evaluating everybody around based off of her. And so, it is a bit of a Hollywood story of, I was like your friend that you just start comparing all other women to, and you're like, oh, well, why don't you just think about your friend? And so I had planned that, like, she didn't want to get married, so it was going to take me about 2 years to convince her that she really wanted to get married. And so through a series of conversations, she sort of let slip that, like, no, I actually do want to get married. And if you were to ask me out, I would say yes. Is basically. And so it took 3 times for me to get it through my skull that, oh, I could just ask her. And so I remember we were at somewhere, and I was like, would you like to go out? I mean, it was as robotic and boring as that. She was like, yes, let's go out.
And isn't that great? Because what you were looking for is a real partner, someone who is emotionally, connected and can have these kinds of open conversations. And instead of being coy or beating around the bush or playing hard to get, she just said yes.
Yes, she was just like very clearly, it wasn't about manipulation. It was like, you need to ask me, and you need to think about whether this is okay for your kids. You know,
Nice.
so it was just like a completely open, no hidden agendas or anything like that type of conversation. And that's how we sort of started our relationship. Um, you know, and so, we were friends first, She knew I was a good guy because I didn't trash my wife in our conversations going through there. She also, just saw all the, the ups and downs of going through startup life and stuff like that. So got to see me through the presser on those sort of things. And she was like, oh, okay, well, I think that this is, I enjoy being around you. And so that's how we started. Again, with the, at the kids at that time, we would constantly have conversations about the kids. And it's funny because the kids actually knew her from being my coworker for the startup and all those time, like the 2 or 3 years that we did the startup. And so I think we had started dating around fully dating for about 6 months. And it was during the summertime. And I remember I had a conversation where it got to the point of where we needed to, we need to start talking to the kids because it was getting a little bit more serious. And I remember I talked to my ex-wife about it. I was like, hey, I've started dating somebody. I was thinking, of introducing her to the kids because I felt like it was respectful to me to just kind of present that out to her. Mm-hmm. And she was kind of completely fine with it. She had a string of people that she had been dating and stuff like that. Never asked me, but that's beside the point. And I told her about the way I was going to introduce the kids to her and tried to get feedback from her, whether she thought that was going to be good or not. And this was all before the move to Colorado when, she had just decided to toss me and you can do whatever you want. And so I introduced the kids to her at my, like in a group setting and stuff like that. And the kids immediately really liked her. And they were like,
nice.
And they kind of took her aside. It was funny. They took her aside and were like, oh, well, I remember talking to them and saying, oh, well, I've been dating this, my current wife. And they were like, oh yeah, we know something was up. And they were kind of pretty positive on it. And then later on, after they met her a couple more times, they were like, well, we kind of want you to be our stepmom.
Oh, wow.
They actually told her that. I constantly remind them of that, that they actually asked her to be their stepmom. Nice. And then, so, we had been dating for, I guess, so we started in May and it was August. And then August came around and that was when the big move to the other state happened, the big flight to the other state. And that completely changed the dynamics.
This is where she absconded with the kids without your permission, without your knowledge.
Right.
And held on to them for a year or 9 months, a year.
Yeah, it was a year. And so that came with all bunch of things. So, and all the challenges that came with the negative and the high conflict divorce, and getting the kids in the custody of the kids. And all through that time, it was high challenges that we were seeing. And my current wife, every step of the way, even when we're dating, she was like, you can trust God. She was able, like when I was really upset and being accused of terrible things, and when she was being accused of terrible things, her responses were like a perfect example of the things that I was looking for. She was always kind, but she always stood up and was like, well, that's not appropriate. She even got deposed and we got accused of having an affair. And that's why the marriage was over, which was completely incorrect. I mean, it's very difficult to have someone like your ex's lawyer deposing and just trashing people's reputation for no good reason. And she went through the ringer on that whole thing. Coming back and the challenges with the kids, thinking that mom was getting replaced with my current wife, and working through that. She was very good about telling his, like, look, I am not your mom. I'm not trying to take the place of your mom. And we kind of came up with that she was really like the most involved aunt that you can think of, that she cares about you more than anything else. She's willing to lay her life down or something like that, but she also respects your mom's role. And so she did a really good job, and we did a really good job of constantly communicating to the kids, this is not a replacement. This is just another person that actually really cares about you.
That's awesome. And then how did you deal with discipline?
With discipline, so from the very beginning, discipline between the two houses, or between the two of us?
Like, did your new wife ever get involved with disciplining the children, or is that something you reserved for the two biological parents?
No, yes. So because my kids are older, the discipline is actually slightly easier. So we would have rules in the house, and they were printed up and put on the wall that we worked with the therapist on. And I was kind of more the authoritarian of the situation, but my wife also was like, one is she was very good at being patient with the kids when they were angry or yelling at her. She'd be like, "You're yelling at me. You need to not yell at me, because that's kind of rude and disrespectful to me as a person. Not because I'm your stepmom, because I'm another human being that you're treating in this way." And so it was like, did we not say that these were the rules? And what do you think is the situation that you have? So she wouldn't give a whole lot of quarter to their outbursts on this situation. And she was way calmer than I was. It was very, that's one of the other areas of where my love addiction, when you see your wife getting yelled at, it becomes very difficult to maintain peace and stuff like that on the situation.
She was able to handle it firmly but graciously, and not make it about, not make it personal, but say this is a bad habit to treat other human beings like this.
Right. So and so that worked really good. So again, we decided when we got married that I was going to treat her as a full co-parent, even though my ex-wife, it was a big challenge for her, because I told everybody, I was like, my wife and I right now, we are going to operate together. So if she says something, it's because we've discussed it, and it's as if I said something. I think that that's really important to maintain peace in a second marriage, that this happens, because there's going to come up a lot of "you're not my mom, you're not my dad" type things. And as long as the parents are together and they decide that they're going to do this, that you should do it together and not try to separate that in your relationship with one another, because there's a lot of difficulties that come when the kids try to split the two houses or split things, or you're putting deference to your ex-wife's or ex-husband's at the expense of your current spouse in the relationship. And that's why picking a person that can be that bonding together is really, really important, because they've really stepped into it. My hats go off to step parents all around the world, that they are some of the most amazing people and needed to be applauded. And I don't think we appropriately praise them when they do well. There's often this, the evil stepmother in Disney films, or we have a culture that doesn't respect step parents as much as I think good step parents do. And my current wife is a wonderful stepmom. They, the kids have finally understood that. And as they've gotten older, because I constantly try to point it out to them, that all the little ways. And funny enough, currently my ex-wife finally started to figure out in the last 6 months that, oh my gosh, I have a third parent that I don't have to do everything with. I don't have to do everything for the kids. So all of a sudden, there's 3 of us being parents rather than just 2 of us being parents. And the advantage of that has really made my ex-wife really happy. Like my current wife really has strong feelings that the kids should do sports, which my ex-wife has too, but doesn't have the discipline to actually sign them up. Whereas my current wife is a really good researcher. And so she was like, I'll take that job on. And it has really made my ex-wife really, really happy that she doesn't have to sign the kids up for any of the sports that they do.
This is
And
awesome. Or keep track of all the uniforms and the equipment, and
yep.
it's great to have an extra pair of hands, driver's license, and 4 wheels, who's reliable and responsible. That's great. That's great that she can see her that way.
Yeah, and so that's taken a long time. I mean, we've been married now a little over 3 years. And I would say it's only in the last 6 months that my ex-wife has finally realized, oh, wait a minute, this person actually is benefiting my life significantly. And so I can encourage her and encourage it. So there's, it's funny, my wife and my ex-wife talk on the phone a lot and text back and
Wow.
forth. We have group texts that we decide, three of us, when we do therapy appointments, my ex-wife and my current wife, we all go to the
I was going to
meetings.
ask, the part of staying on the same, keeping your story straight and agreeing to where the boundaries is probably that therapist in that room. And I think that's really amazing. Tell me how that works with the three of you in the room.
Well, so the therapists always, like, another really good is when the therapists treat all the parents and step parents. It's like, you are a caregiver. You are there to protect. And if we make the focus the child growing up and having all the tools that they need to be a fully functioning, healthy adult in the world, all the caregivers here need to have an equal footing. We all know that the
Mm.
biological parents have the legal custody to make legal decisions or medical decisions about things. But remember, a happy home where there's peace and the caregivers are given equal footing is the best thing that can happen for the child. So that is what we've sort of all decided to come into agreement. And we've had some challenges with some of our, a couple of our kids that we're going through right now. Nobody comes through what we've gone through unscathed, or have the family of origin issues that we have and not become unscathed. And I think when you make the children the focus, it becomes much easier to give up these things and not have the rivalry. I mean, I think it also took 3 years of my ex-wife seeing my current wife constantly encourage the children with their mother. So
To
that
stay
there
in
was,
touch with her, to have a
right,
good relationship with her, to call her, to be
right.
with her, to enjoy time with her. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think, and that's one of the things, is my current wife is an excellent communicator, and excellent about constantly being encouraging. She doesn't get embarrassed and will have tough conversations and can hear, like, very strong negative feedback and not take it on. I mean, she's just really incredible. And because you have to have a kind of a thick skin about that, and you have to communicate. So constant communication, constant encouragement, and being an independent person is really good.
Well, this is so excellent, and this gives so many people hope. Do you have a message that you would like to give other men who are exiting, they're heartbroken, they're destroyed, they've been run over in an abusive or manipulative or deceitful marriage? What's your message to them?
Um, my message to them is that you can have the idea of marriage that you thought, like separating what happened to you from the good things that you wanted. I mean, I think typically men that are like me have been taken advantage, and they feel like, well, what did I get wrong? Is it wrong to want to be married to somebody? Is it wrong to want to be caring and loving and protective? Is it wrong to want to stand in the gap for these things? And those things are not wrong. It's, you just have to be wise. And so my constant message to myself that I've done over the years and all the things is like, okay, how do I be wise in this situation? How do I look at myself and say, where are my blind spots? And, not try to ignore them, and kind of, move forward with hope that because you wanted a good marriage, that is a good thing. Wanting a good marriage is a good thing, but wanting a good marriage blindly is a really bad thing.
Very
So
dangerous thing.
it's
Yeah,
very,
absolutely.
very dangerous. So do that fearless moral inventory, be complete in yourself and work on yourself. Um, and realize that your desire, if you continue to have the desire to be married, that's okay. Like that's a good thing to do. You know, you don't have to judge yourself as being like a sucker, or what if I'm going to do this again, or one of those things. Like the reason why you're not going to do it again is because you're doing the fearless moral inventory and you're working on yourself and trying to be an independent person, because healthy people do not like to be with sick people. Okay, it is just, and so don't do that. Don't like set the bar low. Don't like, you know, don't settle for things. You know, when you see a red flags, say, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
And how people respond to you saying, I don't like that red flag, is will tell you what kind of person they are.
Give us an example.
Um, of so like with my current wife, one of the things that was difficult is it sounds weird because I'm going to say two opposite things. Because of how I like to please the significant other that I'm with. I knew that before I went into, before I got into a relationship, I needed to be clear that I needed to have my own independent things to do. And that was for me to not make my entire identity being with somebody. It was doing these things.
Right.
So,
you're not wrapping your whole life around them. You have things that are important to you.
right. And so so with my current wife, when we were dating or something like that, I was really clear about this. I was like, I have to have my own independent things to do this. And her reaction to that was, I think that that's a great idea.
One last topic. What is your relationship with God like now? And what's your relationship with the church like right now?
So my relationship with God is, again, it continues to be strong. I would not have made it through all the things that I made it through. I would not be alive today if I didn't reevaluate and basically go through a deconstruction where I came to the end and said, look, I really do love the Lord. I really do believe these things in the Bible. My interpretations were wrong. And how do I take the information that I'm getting from all the sources that I have and still relate to God in a good way? I would say I'm at peace with my past of being wrong about things. And I feel like God has been very encouraging to that. So like, I love being a Christian. I love communicating with God. I love praying. I love the things of the Lord. And it has given me a confidence in my faith that I never had before, even though I would say I was trying to live more. I hold some pretty radical views right now that would be opposed to the evangelical church in a variety of areas, because, and that's to your second question, is how do I relate to the church? It's a constant give and take on a lot of things. I don't do church membership. That's one thing. If a church asks for membership, I either say I'm not doing it, or or I find a new church. I have a different relationship with church where I realize, okay, my meaningful growth areas is reading books on theology and having close friendships that encourage me. It's not primarily through the church. The church is God's place to present the gospel and to find people that are like-minded, but I don't give control over to the church at all for anything. Like they don't hold the sway that they used to do when I grew up, where it's like what they say goes, and understand that that's okay. That's not against God. I still really like going to church. I love corporate worship. I love hearing and finding places to care and serve, and it's big for my wife too. And so we take the kids still and go to church, and we have a church, but we also visit lots of other churches. We don't just have one church. that we go to. We have a primary church that we go to, and then we have several other ones that we do.
So you're not, so by refusing membership, you're also refusing to let them get their hooks in you. You're refusing their direct authority over your life, your decision-making, even your theological views.
Yes, and I think that is a super healthy thing that we have sort of lost in the church. I think church is really important. I think scripture is pretty clear about meeting with other believers in a structured way. I don't think it has to look like what the American evangelical church looks like. I think the American evangelical church is sort of like it's an easy way to get the things that this Bible talks about. It's not the only way. So I look for red flags that churches like, oh, well, we're the way to do things. It's like red flag goes up. You got to treat your church like a potential significant other, because that's exactly what they are.
So if they take advantage of you and tell you that they know the right way.
Exactly. If you're my way or the highway, it's like, that's a red flag. I would not date or marry that person. I'm not going to do that. You know, if they're like, oh, we're the greatest thing, just narcissistic tendencies that churches do. You know, it's like, you've got to evaluate a church as if they were a significant other, because that's what they are.
Well, and on that message, as many people in my group say, I divorced my ex and I divorced my pastor too. So,
yes.
All right. Well, thank you, David, so much. What a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for sharing so intimately with us. And I just pray that other men who find themselves in your shoes take courage and take insight and use the best brains, the best wisdom, and the best discernment they can as they look for a relationship in the future. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.